Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. My name is Wayne, and this is a video about how I converted my Goldberg Ultimate biplane from glow fuel to electric. I started building the plane from a kit back in the 90s, and I got the wings covered and the fuselage covered with a lot of work left to be done. Originally, it was going to have an OS 120 four-stroke on it, and I still have that motor. It has never been run. I'll be selling it because I'm going electric, man. I started a You-Can-Do about that same time, thinking it would be quicker to put it together, but I finally got that one together last summer. This one uses the same power system as that one, and I'll leave a link in the description if you want to check out that video. I apologize in advance. This is going to be a little bit of a long video because I want to show you the thought processes that I was going through along the way, and I didn't always use the first idea that I came up with, so I'm going to show you some stuff that I tried and how I changed horses. A few of the electric planes that I bought recently had servos in the back for the elevator and rudder, and it looked like a good idea to me, so I changed the plans on this one to do that. I knew I wasn't going to be able to use the plastic cowl that came with the kit because I needed to swap out the battery, and this cowl was going to cover up that whole area, so what I had to do was rebuild the entire front end of this plane. My friend Rob, who helped me select the power system for the plane, had the Beast. I took some pictures of what it looked like in the front end and decided to try to use that as an example to move forward on mine. I watched a few videos on how to create a battery hatch, and what it comes down to is cutting up the front of your plane. I did not save those links, so if you want to watch those videos, you'll have to look them up yourself. Sorry about that. I got a contour gauge at Harbor Freight so that I could get the contour of the top of the fuselage. I then made a template out of cardboard and fitted it inside the fuselage so that I made sure it fit. Then I made two formers. One was going to be on each side of the cut. I spaced them out by pushing T-pins through from the inside. By pushing T-pins through from the inside on each end of the cut, you can see where the line was going to be, so I used either rubber bands or tape to mark that spot. Then when you cut through the fuselage, you're actually cutting between the two formers that you glued in on the inside. I used a multi-tool to cut the front. Now you can see how the two formers were used. The new firewall was going to have to be 2 3/4 inches farther forward. A lot of electric planes use a motor box and then they still put a plastic cowl around it, but my battery was going to have to be real far forward to make this plane balance, I was pretty sure. Especially since I was planning to put the servos in the back for the rudder and the elevator. In fact, I was going to use 2 servos for the elevator, but those plans changed. So I'll jump to the back of the plane and show you some servo mounts that I was going to use, but ultimately I wound up just covering over them. With the plane upside down and the wing off, the plans call for 3 servos on a servo rail, so they're all in a row. I'll be using an ESC, so I won't need one of the servos for the throttle. My friend Garrett guided me towards some digital servos that are going to be a little heavier than the ones that the plans called for, and he advised me against putting servos in the back of the plane if I could help it. In fact, he told me to put them as far forward as I can. It might be a mistake, but I'm looking for as much throw as I can get on the control surfaces, and as a result, I used longer servo arms than they call for. I made a platform for the center servo, which is going to be a pull-pull system for the rudder, and by making that platform, I could get the other servo arm for the elevators to be underneath and the arms would not collide. Also, raising the rudder servo allows the elevator arm to be closer to the center of the plane, which is good because I'm using only one push rod that then splits off onto both of the elevators at the backside. So back to the front of the plane, I extended the sides forward and built a new firewall and a new bottom. And next I had to build a actual hatch that I could take off and put a battery in. I used the plans to help me with the shape of how that was supposed to look, and I tried to duplicate the front of the cowl with balsa. I didn't use the first attempt, but it did give me an excuse to go to Harbor Freights again and buy a scroll saw. Throughout all of this, I was referencing the picture of the beast, and what I had done is put the motor too far down on the firewall, thinking that I was going to make a battery hatch that went all the way to the front of the airplane. So that is the thrust line for the beast, but it is not necessarily the thrust line for the ultimate biplane. So I remade the firewall taller in line with the top of the fuselage so I could mount the motor higher. I used the firewall and the fuselage in the back to basically trace the front and back of the battery hatch. If I were to do this again, I would make the back of the battery hatch more of an angle so that it would drop in without creating a bit of a bind. And I knew it was going to happen, but I went ahead and did it anyway. After trying to decide what I was going to have to do to cobble something together to fill in the gap between the firewall and the front of the cowl, I decided to just get blocks of balsa and whittle away whatever I needed to have it be the shape that I needed. I'm still concerned about having enough venting in here to cool the ESC, and the motor is going to be right out front, but there is going to be a spinner on it, and so hopefully they'll have enough air directed onto the motor to cool that and enough air going through these vent holes to cool the ESC and the battery. I could see I was going to need to open up the front of this cowl to allow more air to go through. Necessity is the mother of invention, and I had some sticky sandpaper and I had a hole saw, so I stuck the sandpaper to the outside of the hole saw to open up the area where the motor was going to go. If only Harbor Freight sold something like that. Well, the next day I found out that they do, and it was only $8, so there you go. Once again, here's a photo of what I cut off the front of the fuselage. I will have to remake this into a battery hatch about 2 3/4 inches longer. So here's the front and back that I showed earlier, glued onto a bottom. I made one more former for the middle of the battery hatch and then glued balsa stringers to each side. If you get balsa sheeting wet, you can actually bend it, and that's how I was able to glue the top of the hatch to the formers and stringers. Popsicle sticks with spacers served as the hold down for the front of the hatch. I glued magnets to the back of the hatch cover as well as to a rail across the fuselage. More popsicle sticks were used to make sure that the battery hatch cover stayed centered. Time to replace the covering. I did not recover the whole plane. I just patched the parts that I took off to do the modifications. Here it's getting pretty close and looking pretty good. I know it adds a little bit of weight, but I decided to put a pilot in this one. I was going to paint the hair gray and put a little goatee on the pilot, but I'm far too lazy for that. I installed the instrument panel and painted the inside of the cockpit black. The canopy is not installed, it's just resting on top of there for this photo. Here are a couple of tricks to painting a canopy that I learned from YouTube. Thank you so much. First, mask off everything you don't want painted. Since the inside of the cockpit is black, I want the inside of the canopy to be black. So I painted my first coat on the canopy black. So that is what you're going to see when you look inside the canopy. Then I painted 2 more coats of white, which is what you're going to see from the outside of the canopy. The battery tray itself was just a thin piece of plywood. I cut several slots so that I could get the Velcro inside of there. Tip, put the Velcro on first before you glue it into place. It'll save you some headaches. I flew one trimming flight so far. It seemed to fly a little bit heavy. I think it was nose heavy. And when I brought it down to move the battery back, I opened up the hatch and checked the ESC, and it was quite hot. So I haven't flown it again yet, but I did order a vented spinner for electric planes to keep them cool. And my buddy Garrett is kind enough to give me a fan for the ESC. So once those two items are installed, I'll be back to the field to fly it again.
Let's see if it flies like an airplane. Oh, it's in the air. I'm having a really hard time tracking it. It disappears into the sky. Okay, let me know when you're going to land. Okay.